guys, welcome to another video for biology. In this video, as we get the year kicked off, we're looking at an introduction to biology. So this one will cover chapter 1, section 1. So as we look at an introduction to biology, I want to talk about this class that is a very all-encompassing class. We actually cover a lot of things from different, from other disciplines such as physics and chemistry and anatomy and physiology. Biology, after all, as we look at the word biology, bio, we're going to split it up into its two parts. The prefix bio meaning life and ology, the study. So this is the study of life. And we're not talking about just human life, but we're talking about all life on this planet. From bacteria all the way to the most complicated life, which is the human being. So what does a biologist do? As a biologist, actually, this is, like I said, this is a very all-encompassing class. You can do a lot of really cool things with biology, a biology degree in particular. You can go into conservation, and we're going to be dealing with this idea quite a bit this year because this is an issue not just locally, but globally. And when I say conservation, I mean conserving the resources that we have from the rainforest, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, to conserving the animal life that exists right now on the planet. Because animals right now are actually becoming more extinct at a much, you're going to read later on, at about 1,000% faster rate than they would normally. And that's mainly because of human activity. So there's conservation. There's also the opportunities to go to exotic locations to study interesting organisms all over the planet. For example, this image is one of Puerto Rico, where you have bioluminescent algae, and it's a very beautiful blue. I actually have not been there, but it's on my bucket list. But I have experienced bioluminescent algae on the West Coast, up in Seattle area. Now, the bioluminescent algae that I experienced was actually a really beautiful green color. You can also study exotic organisms. Now, this particular organism, this say anemone, this is one that I'm actually very familiar with because my research was actually based off of, when I was a biology student, when I was doing my research project, was based off of the sea anemone, especially the one in Seattle, the bioluminescent sea anemones. And I don't even know if you're hearing right now if my microphone's picking it up, but in Texas we have quite an assortment of organisms too. Here in the San Antonio area, right now the cicadas are buzzing pretty loud right outside my window. So I don't know if you're picking that up or not. So as a student, I got to go through as I did my research in Seattle, I got to go experience and visit many different beaches and take samples of this bioluminescent sea anemones, and I helped a professor to break down the sea anemones and to extract the protein that causes the bioluminescent algae. Now, this bioluminescent algae is actually pretty cool because this protein, anyways, you can actually inject it into another organism. That I've seen pigs that actually glow in the dark, and I'll add an image here so you can see that. And so I got to visit a lot of really cool beaches in Seattle, and even further up north into Anacortes and Orcas Island. And in my research, I came across other researchers, and I came across this one particular study being done in this area here, where the sea stars were actually dying off by the millions, and there was a mystery as to what was going on, where the sea stars were literally just degrading and breaking down. The arms were falling off, and then this was by the millions. I mean, it was a really concerning thing going on. And as a biologist, you can dive into these things. And as I mentioned before, we're going to be looking into conservation. Now, as for our class, later on this year, we'll talk about more in detail how we're going to take a big trip to Big Bend National Park. And this is actually the biggest and the least visited national park in the United States, and it offers a lot of really unique features that you don't get in other parks around the world. So this is actually a really cool experience that we're going to get to go for a week and visit Big Bend National Park, and we actually get to camp out in this is a view that you're going to get. We're actually going to be in that valley of these mountains that you're seeing in this image, and we'll be looking at taking hikes in areas like this and exploring the different organisms and ecosystems that exist there. Now, when you think of West Texas, you're probably thinking just desert, but in this particular area, there's actually about 5 different ecosystems that we're going to visit. And, as I was mentioning before, one of the other areas of biology is diversity. When you think, and this is probably my favorite part about biology is, even to this point, there's always something new to be learning in biology. I'm not surprised, but I'm pleasantly surprised when I open up the news and I read about some exotic organism that that we're just now discovering, or that has been around, but I just learned about it. Biology offers just a plethora of things to study, and even with organisms that we already know, or that we've known for a long time, there's things that they're offering to our planet that we weren't aware of before. And we're going to explore a lot of these really cool things in biology throughout this year. Okay, so for example, I was mentioning before the rainforest. The rainforest has 120 of our prescription drugs are derived from the rainforest plants. And one of the alarming things, and 2/3 of these cancer-fighting drugs are derived from rainforest. So nature has a lot to offer us in the world of technology and in the world of medicine. And actually, let me back up here. And the reason why I had these slides up here is because nature has a lot to offer us, but like I mentioned before, human activity is destroying a lot of that potential, and we're just ravaging the planet. And as a student, I just want to give you guys something to think about as far as being good, responsible stewards of nature, because that is a part of our calling as students and as citizens of this planet, to be aware of the beauty around us and the diversity and what it has to offer, and being responsible and maintaining that. So in our study of biology, when we try to classify organisms as whether they're something that living or not living, there are 8 basic characteristics that we look at for an organism to be classified as a living biological organism, it has to have all 8 of these characteristics. It cannot have any of these missing. And you're going to see that every organism that we do study does in fact have these 8 characteristics. And these 8 characteristics you are going to have to know them. Make sure that as you're taking notes, that you are writing these down and you're studying these. So the first one is that they're made out of 1 or more cells. Okay, so the human body is made out of about 75 trillion cells. That's a lot. But there are some organisms that are made out of just 1 or 2 cells, like bacteria, parameciums, amoebas, things that you cannot see with the unaided eye, but you can with a microscope. The second characteristic is it displays organization. Okay, so it's fairly complex. Even one-celled organisms display organization. Okay, so cells or an organism is made out of DNA. It's made out of atoms, and that DNA makes molecules, it makes cells, and it makes tissues, and then the development of the organization just gets more and more complex as you kind of expand and you broaden the view of what you're looking at. So it displays organization. The third characteristic is that it grows and develops. And this is a very, it may look very simple as to what's happening here, but this is actually a very complex concept here of something that is growing and developing, because as varied as the world is of animals, the development of these animals is also very unique. For example, with the butterfly, we'll discuss this particular idea in a little bit more detail in class. No, actually, I'll go ahead and say a little bit about it now. As you look at the butterfly, the caterpillar, and before it turns into a butterfly, it goes into a chrysalis or a cocoon, and inside of that caterpillar, you essentially have like a milkshake of an organism in there, and you have, at some point, as it's metamorphosizing, it's almost like it's an in-between. It's almost like 2 organisms living in that cocoon, and right before it's neither a caterpillar nor a butterfly, but it's somewhere in between, or it's both. It's actually a really fascinating study as far as how the caterpillar turns into a butterfly. But all living organisms have some development, some process as they develop and grow to become full adults. It also reproduces. So biological organisms reproduce, and in order to live, in order to advance, beyond, yourself, you have to propagate. For a human organism, a person will live up to, 80 years or so. Well, the way that we keep advancing the human race is by having children. Also, it responds to stimuli. If you get cold, what do? You start to shiver. Well, actually, that's kind of more of a homeostasis thing. There is some overlap in these concepts, but as we're looking at here, the chameleon, for example, when you have a male chameleon and it comes across another male chameleon, they don't typically like to hang out. They're kind of territorial. The chameleon will actually turn a really bright red. It'll get red hot mad, and then a battle will ensue, and the winner gets the territory or the female. So the organism will respond to stimuli. Okay, it also requires energy. Now, our ultimate source of energy is the sun, and plants absorb the sun and transfer that energy into glucose, and then other organisms eat that plant, and the energy gets passed along. And this is something that we're going to dive really deep into later on in biology. And so the seventh characteristic is it maintains homeostasis. Homeostasis, think of it as a seesaw. It wants to be balanced. You don't want to be too much of one or too much of the other extreme. For example, as I have here, you have temperature control. Like in a house, if it gets too hot, then the AC turns on. And if it gets too cold, then you'll have a heater that turns on to maintain a specific temperature. Likewise with the human being. We typically like it about 98.6 degrees or so. Now, not every human is at 98. Like for example, my internal temperature, every time I take my temp, is around 99. And yours might vary as well. You could be like a 97 or 98.6. It's just an average. But if you get too hot, your body will sweat. If you get too cold, your muscles will shiver to produce heat. So that's just, maintaining homeostasis. And this is just one of thousands of reactions that the body goes through to maintain homeostasis. Adaptations, or they evolve over time. And when I say evolve, I don't mean like the idea of like Darwinian evolution, where you have a one-celled organism that evolves into us. That's a different concept of evolution that I'm talking about, and we'll address that in greater detail later. What I'm talking about is adaptations to your environment. So, for example, we have the Gila monster, or the fox, or the desert spined lizard. These adaptations, the spined lizard, for example, has spines so that or horns so that they don't get eaten by other organisms. And the Gila monster will store up fat, because in the desert you don't have a lot of food, so he'll store up fat as food becomes more scarce, and he'll feed off of that fat. And the fox at the bottom right, the big ears you see there, those big ears actually help maintain body temperature, because the blood will flow to the ears and they cool off, and then it goes back into the body. So these are minor adaptations that can either come and go depending on the season or the situation that the animal may live in, because there are some horned lizards, for example, that don't have that many, depending on how they propagate, depending on the genes that they express, the mate expresses, and the next line, and so on. So again, when I say adaptations and evolving over time, I do not mean that, for example, this lizard will evolve into a chicken or something like that. That's a whole different other idea of evolution that we are referring to in this particular slide. And like I said, we do discuss evolution later on in greater detail. Okay, so here again is a summary of the 8 characteristics of life. You do want to know what each of these is and what it does. And remember that a living organism has all 8 of these characteristics, not just 1, 2, or half of them. It has to have all 8 for it to be a living organism. All right, well, that's going to do it for this introduction to biology for the first section. I hope you learned something new. Thanks for watching, guys, and good luck in your studying.